will start with item A, which is the overview and update on the I-27 corridor. And today we have our Ports to Plains President and CEO, Lauren Garduno. Lauren, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Make sure I'm talking to that, I was told. Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today, and to give you an update on what's been going on with Ports to Plains corridor and how it relates to San Angelo. And I look forward to making this presentation to you this morning and offer up my time for any questions that you may have throughout the presentation. But my name is Lauren Garduno, and I have, I'm pushing the up button, I push the green button. There we go. Up and down. Hey, okay. I have been with the Ports to Plains Alliance since September of this last year, so about 9-10 months is when I came on board. Prior to that, I had spent 35 years with the Department of Transportation, Texas, and various leadership positions throughout West Texas, Odessa, Abilene, finally finishing up in Austin in their administration, overseeing planning and project development for the state. So, but I live in Abilene and farm and ranch in South Taylor County, Runnels area, and so and I do business in San Angelo, so I'm back and forth between San Angelo and Abilene a lot as I take care of some farm and ranching operations. But here today, I'm here to talk to you about Ports to Plains, some of the things that have happened. I'll give you, and I know we have some members that probably need probably a briefing on what the history, what the Ports to Plains is and what it's about. And then we're going to kind of narrow in on what's been going on about the last 4 or 5 years with the Ports to Plains Alliance. And I'll particularly finish it off by kind of narrowing in what is going on as it relates to the city of San Angelo and in your respective areas. So that is kind of the agenda. But Ports to Plains is a highway transportation corridor that goes all the way from Laredo all the way to the Ports to Plains portion goes up to Denver. But we actually have, as far as the trade alliance goes, we have 2 partnering trade organizations called the Heartland Expressway and the Theodore Roosevelt Expressway, and that takes the corridor, the trade corridor, all the way from Laredo all the way to Canada, to the state of Alberta. And so it has been designated as a national highway system high priority corridor. The Ports to Plains one has, and it was created. Really, if you think about it, when you think about the NAFTA agreement, after it was signed, and you start talking about freight, trade, movement of goods from Mexico and Canada with the United States, this corridor was kind of started to come into play after the creation of NAFTA and the movement of those goods up and down that corridor. But we have seen a dramatic increase in the movement of goods out of Mexico. And as we see the kind of world events are happening, even in the last 3 or 4 years, I think we're going to continue to see the possibility of a greater emphasis upon our trading partnership with Mexico, particularly, especially as it relates to Texas and even Canada in the future as it goes into the north. But you're going to hear things in the future about nearshoring, and bringing a lot of that stuff that currently is going over in China, that's going to China. You're going to see a lot of that all of a sudden be moving into Mexico and Central America, and all of a sudden it drives the emphasis upon why this transportation corridor is so important and will continue to be so important for us. This is a visual, kind of gives you a picture of kind of where the corridor goes to the Midwestern United States. If you think about it, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, as with some of the latest things we've been doing in Texas, particularly is a future interstate discussion, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But if you think about it, a lot of the nation's interstate systems are east-west systems. And have been. And that's the reason why was when the act was signed in the 50s by President Eisenhower, it was about going west. It's about going west, It's about getting from the East Coast to the West Coast. And really there wasn't a lot of movement north and south unless you were driving cattle from South Texas to the rail yards in Kansas or something. So our route parallels the old cattle drives of the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And so you kind of can see that there, going right through the breadbasket of the United States. But what has happened is after NAFTA was signed and the Ports to Plains corridor was created, in the early 2000s, there were 5 DOTs, state DOTs, that got together and said, let's looking at a management plan of how we would build this corridor out. And at the time, the conversation was about a 4-lane divided highway. We're not talking about interstate. We're not talking about future interstate. We're just talking about improving transportation network to 4-lane divided standards so that, so that we can move freight and goods up and down the corridor. Those states got together and put a plan together and started to work the plan. And I'll give you an example. New Mexico, they sold bonds in that time frame under Governor Richardson and Governor Johnson. They sold bonds, and they built their portion of their Ports Plains corridor from Clayton to Raton. They upgraded it to 4-lane standards and got that built. Texas started to work on their plan, and the problem with Texas is you have about 11,000 lane miles of trunk system that Ports Plains is a part of the trunk systems, and so you're having to compete with 11,000 lane miles of corridor for that funding, right? Colorado started working theirs, and this was the way the plan looked. As you can see, it was basically our Ports Plains corridor identified into short-term and mid-term and long-term completion programs. If the money would have been there, we would not, today, we'd be talking about something else. But what happened was, as you can see, their plan at the time in 2004 was about trying to have this thing built out maybe by 2010, 2011, 2012, and we'd be having a different conversation. But this is what happened to us in Texas. From 2004 to 2008, we were averaging about $140 million per year on our statewide corridors. But that now, keep in mind, that's going over 11,000 lane miles of highway that you're trying to put that money to. It just doesn't go very far, and it wasn't going very far. But then what happened is, and in 2008 to basically 2015, Texas, the funding just dried up completely. In fact, if you were in San Angelo, even sitting in your MPO, working with your MPO, looking for Category 2 funding in your MPO, during that time frame, San Angelo wasn't getting a lot of money from TxDOT and the state government to do work within even your city of San Angelo. There just was no money statewide. In fact, what happened in Texas was they started bonding, they started toll laning in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin, and Houston, and that's the way that some of those districts were able to continue to build programs out from 2008 to 15. While the rest of the state, a lot of us in the rural area, I'm talking about the San Angelos, the Abilenes, the Odessas, and Amarillos, we just basically didn't have a lot of money to build with, and so the corridor build out definitely went away. You heard the creation of a new term that came up during that time frame, and it was I credit a district engineer up in Childress, Texas, for coming up with this about building a Super 2s. We don't have room to build 4-lane divided. We don't have the money to build 4-lane divided, but maybe with our reduced budget, we can build those passing lane corridors, and you'll see some exhibits. You'll see some examples of that, like even on 277 going down to Cristobal. You'll see the build out of what we call Super 2 highways. They're basically 3-lane highways for truck passing, right? It's a cheaper footprint, and that's kind of what Texas started doing with their limited money from basically 2008 to 15. Trying to at least build some capacity in their system that was continuing to grow. Something happened though in 14 and 15. The state of Texas voters passed 2 propositions. Proposition 1, Proposition 7. Oil and gas severance on 1, sales tax on 7. And what that did for the TxDOT's budget for building and construction, it basically doubled it overnight. So in 2016, TxDOT put $60 million per year program for statewide corridor. I'm talking about, these building out our Ports Plains corridors and stuff. $60 million, that's not a lot of money. That's not a lot of money at all for the whole state. But then overnight, that Unified Transportation Program that was about $35 billion in your 10-year budget went from $35 billion to about $75 billion from Prop 1 and Prop 7 oil and gas and sales tax revenue. It changed the game. And lo and behold, TxDOT went back and started looking at their corridor again, and they said, we can afford to spend money in what they call Category 4, which is rural and urban corridors, and they started putting money in those corridors. Some of the state was taking advantage of that. I'll give you an example. The I-29 corridor over in East Texas, the Lufkin district, the district engineer in Lufkin, she was a planner at the time. She had actually started the relief route studies off around some of those communities on the 69 corridor. So when the money turned on in 16 and 17, she was at the front of the trough, to go get some of that money because she had done the planning work early and prepared herself for this influx of money. So you see some projects that got picked up pretty quick because that money became available. And I say that for a key reason. One of our strategies that we are actually focusing on is to make sure that we are doing the planning work now to be in a position to compete for that Unified Transportation Program construction money later. And that's an important, that's going to be an important effort for us. But what that looked like in this Unified Transportation Program, this is a picture of a slide that TxDOT presented to the Highway Commission about 3 months ago, updating their program. Now I told you in 16-17 it went to $75 billion. Today, going into August, the commission is going to vote on a Unified Transportation Program that's at $100 billion. $100 billion. And it has gone up that much in the last 6 years even. And you can see here that I've highlighted certain categories of funding that's construction funding, particularly the statewide connectivity rural area. They put $10 billion. That's $100 million. That's $100 million a year. And then they've got the 4U urban connectivity that allows us to do work inside these MPO boundaries, inside San Angelo's MPO boundary on corridors, and they've stuck $7.8 billion per year to be distributed throughout the state. But not only that, the commission has actually given us about $3.5 billion of energy sector money, and San Angelo is in the energy sector. So we have the good fortune of actually having a pretty healthy a budget of energy sector money that we can spend to improve our corridors and our highways in the San Angelo region. A lot of that money is distributed by formula. The Permian Basin gets a big chunk of it, 50% of that, in fact, because that's where it's being generated from, right? And so you see that play out there. But the commission also sets aside about $14 billion of that $100 billion to Cat 12. And that's where the commission passes out money as strategic priority projects. A lot of it goes to the Clear Lanes initiative in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, on these big mega projects. A lot of that money is going there. But they have been known to pass out money to some of the rural areas on our corridors, and some of our districts on the Ports to Plains have benefited from Category 12 Commission strategic priority money. That's important because you have a commissioner in your backyard that sits on that commission, and so understanding that right there is important because you know that he has an opportunity to help us with with some of that Cat 12 program also. But I point out one other thing here. A lot of times people forget about. Everybody likes to preach and talk about the $100 billion construction program. Everybody's excited about the $100 billion construction program. But there is a below the UTP distribution line down there, that bottom yellow box, that number is $34.2 billion that's in the 10-year window. And where that money is that every 2 years, when TxDOT goes in front of the legislature and asks for their operating budget, the legislative appropriation request operating budget, they budget, not only do they budget some of this construction money in their budget, but they also have to budget planning, engineering, right-of-way, administrative, all that is in that budget. That $34.2 billion is basically 5 LAR cycles, legislative appropriation cycles, every 2 years. And that represents all the engineering, all the right-of-way, all the preliminary studies, all that stuff that they're going to have to spend to deliver this $100 billion program. And I tell you that because that's the money I'm going after. That's the money I'm interested in. I'm interested in TxDOT putting money out of that $34.2 billion on planning and developing our corridor. And so that's kind of one of our strategies that we're using when we think about it in that way. What's happened in the last 5 years is actually a lot. TxDOT completed a freight mobility plan in 2018. At the time, TxDOT was really, just getting into spending their Cat 4 program again. Like I said, 2018 was about the time that the UTP doubled and we started to see some money. But they really hadn't had a focus on, they really didn't have a focus on any of the interstates. I'll just tell you, and I'll tell you because I was there. The focus wasn't on any of the interstates. It was really about just trying to distribute this Cat 4 money across all these corridors statewide. So we did a study on freight mobility plan, but then later there was a possible recommendation out of that freight mobility plan to do an I-27 extension. Now that was TxDOT driven at the time. That particular recommendation was TxDOT driven. And it started to kind of generate some interest about the idea of possible future interstate. But really, it wasn't. It was just an interest by TxDOT. It really got pushed over the goal line by Senator Perry. Senator Perry up in Lubbock is the one that actually wrote a bill and it was signed by Perry, and it was Representative Ford Price up in the Amarillo region. They put the bill in place, House Bill 1079, that actually told TxDOT, no, don't just think about this study, TxDOT, do the study. Let's see what the economic benefits would be if we actually did do a future interstate in Texas, on the western side of Texas. And they did. They put a study in place, came up with the results, and this was kind of an idea of the study area that we were looking at. It basically followed the Ports to Plains corridor from Laredo, out of Laredo up through northern Panhandle. You can see we have two splits on our corridor today. We have the split at Sterling City that goes to Midland, Odessa, and comes back together at La Mesa, and then the other segment goes up through Big Spring. We also have the split at Dumas, and one segment goes over to New Mexico, and then the other segment goes north up into Oklahoma. Ideally, that segment, it goes into the eastern range of Colorado. Our goal is to take it to Lyman, Colorado, because that's where the Ports Plains corridor is, and it will end in it would end on I-76 there at Lyman. However, TxDOT can't study future interstate in Colorado. They can't study future interstate in New Mexico. They can only study future interstate in Texas. So that's kind of why that study limit was there. But these are the numbers. These numbers showed, it kind of woke everybody up. They said, you know what? If we can get an interstate built in Texas over here, there's a lot of value. Benefit ratio, cost ratio was plus. There's a 17.
Talk about the cost ratio, because that's an important element that really is what we're going to build aggressively on.
Yeah, sure, Mayor. So anytime you're over 1.0, it's telling you that whatever dollar you invest in, you'll get that plus back, right? And y'all understand that. And so now we're talking about, and the cost to build our interstate in Texas is going to be about $26 billion. $26 billion. It's a lot of money, but if you can get it built, it's going to bring back a 2.4 plus on $26 billion to the state of Texas, right?
That's huge.
It's a big number. And then the GDP, 17.8 billion increase on your GDP. So we're talking, so our Economic Development Corp, our cities, our counties, our businesses, it just will continue to have that kind of an impact. There are job creation with this as we build out. You have a local contractor that's a member of our alliance, Reese Albert. They've been one of the founding members of this, and they stand to benefit by building out this corridor with us. And so we just have a wonderful opportunity. And what this really did more than anything, though, folks, is what this did was it turned TxDOT's eye towards, we're no longer going to put it off on as just a kind of a passive thing. We're going to actively look at possibly seeing what we can do to build this corridor out.
Well,
it changed the game.
Yeah, explain that, because what it did, creating 1079, forced a consultant group to be employed.
It did.
And to study the entire corridor and prove up the numbers that you've just said.
It did.
So they no longer could say, we don't know if it benefits us. The consultant group proved that it would benefit the state of Texas.
It did.
And that has been a key element in terms of being able to push this forward.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Mayor, what it has also done for us with TxDOT is TxDOT has several designated, legislative designated committees that oversee certain programs that they're responsible for overseeing, including the one that we're going to talk about at the end of this presentation, which is the I-27 Advisory Committee that was created under a different bill, which actually it's our committee for our corridor. But we have a Border Trade Advisory Committee, we have a Freight Multimodal Committee, we have the I-27 Advisory Committee. All those committees, what's interesting is now the Ports to Plains corridor is being integrated into every one of those committees. The Border Trade, and that's important for us because if you get the Border Trade Advisory Committee that's dealing with the districts along the border, if you get them talking about Ports to Plains, in their meetings and in their investments and in their management plan, then that's just one other program that TxDOT is managing that we take advantage of and have the benefit from. The Freight Advisory Committee, they got Texas DOT, like all 50 DOTs have to put together a freight plan for the federal government. And that freight plan has to say these are the corridors, this is what we're working on, and it's important that we are integrated into that national freight plan too, which we are. And TxDOT has picked that up on us too. So it's a key thing for us. It has been a key thing for us. And with that being said, Senate Bill 1474, they did create an Interstate 27 Advisory Committee. And I will say this, that Portsmouth Plains was very influential in how that committee, how that language looked in the creation of that committee. So there's your alliance working for you, trying to make sure that we get the representation that we need out of our cities and county governments that are all up and down this corridor. And you can see there that it's made up of county judges. Have been identified on the Portsmouth Plains corridor, but it also includes some of our big cities and our major cities. San Angelo, of course, I've highlighted there, is one of them. Your mayor sits on that I-27 Advisory Committee, as your representation for, and it meets twice a year. And it is interacting with TxDOT on project recommendations for projects on this corridor as they develop their plan. This is kind of a visual, and Tom Green County, the county actually has a seat on it. So it's important for our county judge to understand that too, that you have a voice that's been written into this bill on this advisory committee that gives you access to TxDOT and to the direction that they're going when they try to look at the future interstate up and down our corridor. But it also, not only that, it includes 3 members who are economic development professionals. And you have and I appreciate the involvement of your local economic development. He's engaged with that, and that's a good thing. And another thing is there's another group, a committee called Multimodal. TxDOT runs a multimodal program, and so we're talking about not only the highway that is up and down the 27 highway, future 27, but we're also talking about how do other transportation linkages come into it. And you sit in a very strategic location because you've got a TxDOT owned railroad that runs through your community, going down into the Presidio region. And why is that important? Because one of our big economic generators on our corridor is the cattle industry. It's a big player and will continue to be a big player. And as we continue to develop our trade relationships with Mexico, I've been having conversations with some of the large cattle feeders up in the Panhandle, and my question to them is, where's your cattle coming from Mexico? I know where it's coming from in the United States. Interesting enough, it comes from the southern United States, and they're bringing it across. A lot of it's coming up 287, skipping us and going over in the Panhandle, through the Dallas-Fort Worth region, that way. But as we build this corridor and improve even I-14 across South Texas, who knows, we may change that model on how that cattle travels through Texas into the Texas Panhandle. But Mexican cattle right now today currently is traveling through the port of Santa Teresa in New Mexico, south of Las Cruces. A lot of it's coming up that way. And so I'm telling you all this as we develop our future interstate down to Laredo, Del Rio, and Eagle Pass, maybe we can change that model. Now, I realize politics in Mexico may drive a little bit where that crossing happens, but at least maybe we can change that model enough to get them to start thinking about taking our corridor. And cattle's a big player. It's a big player in this discussion. So they have a seat at the table when it comes to how we build this thing out.
But that railroad coming out Presidio is hugely important because, in fact, many of the agricultural businesses in Mexico lose 30% of their crop while they're in a truck waiting to cross the border. So it's very congested, it's expensive, and opening that bridge would dynamically change the cost of operation for the agricultural industry.
I agree completely. And just a side note, I've had a wild hair idea about how we can develop that railroad down Alpine South. We need to form a dinner train and have like a Murder on the Orient Express kind of, that's floating in my head, but anyway. So, provide some tourism down there and another use of the railroad, right? If you can get another use for it, building it out, right?
Well, so you could do that from Fort Stockton to here.
We could, yeah. So anyway, I've got this Murder on the Orient dinner party.
I heard a Knives Out story coming up.
Yeah. Anyway, that was one of my wild-headed ideas I had about that railroad a few years ago.
Go anyway. East, north and east to San Angelo.
Okay. Anyway, and see, you can recruit the Angelo State, the students, the liberal arts program. They can be they can put your program together. There's all kinds of potential there. Y'all can do.
Well, Texas Pacifico is headed here in San Angelo.
Correct. That's correct. So who says you have to go down to Alpine to have a tourism spot? You can do it in San Angelo, can't you? So hey, there's my idea. You can have it. It's free. There you go. I bring this slide up because this was the recommendation from the 27 committees. You can't read that very well, I'm sorry, but you'll have a copy of this presentation. You can look at it later. And you can actually look at this report. We can make this report available to you. But I highlight on that committee implementation plan, the key you see there is short-term, mid-term, and long-term recommendations on those projects. I say that because I showed you some slides earlier in this deck that talked about in '04 how these 5 DOTs had a short-term, mid-term, long-term plan. It's always interesting when we start talking about short-term, mid-term, long-term plan, what gets lost in the short-term, mid-term, long-term, right? It gets lost in it. So we will take the recommendations, and this is the public involvement recommendations of, basically you guys, that submitted, this is what we think should be built out. And they've broken it into 3 types of projects. They've broken it into interstate upgrades between cities, relief routes, or through routes even, because in some of these cities you don't have to go around it. You might be able to develop through it in a way. And then safety operational improvements. And some of those, and I'm telling you that 3 areas, it's important because remember that slide that showed the UTP and had all those categories of funding? There was a safety category. There's a bridge category. It doesn't mean that we have to just go into corridor money or into commission strategic priority money to build your Ports and Plains corridor. We're going to look at all that.
But also, we need to explain the following, and that is that you won't go from 2-lane with a passing lane to 4-lane interstate. You go from one to the next step up to the next step up. So there would be work being done to upgrade to get to interstate quality in terms of the entire corridor, but it would happen in steps.
Yeah, so I'll give you a visual how that might look. San Angelo District is doing a lot of Super 2 upgrades on some corridors, safety for reasons. 137, for example, going down to Big Lake. They've got that whole corridor nearly identified for Super 2 upgrade. I drove 277 in yesterday, and we've got some Super 2 being built just north of town, right? Cristobal, Merchant Highway, that's a Super 2. Some of that 67 is Super 2. So what you will see is that TxDOT's going to have to make operational improvements and rehabilitation improvements to their highways, and they're going to have to continue to do that, and they got funding to do that. They got maintenance rehab type funding to do that, and they can do some Super 2 work even in that. But in the meantime, we are going to work with TxDOT to go after the planning dollars, that $34 billion below the line, to actually start looking at feasibility and right-of-way needs and controlled access on these corridors to get them where we can actually buy right-of-way for a future interstate standard. And then TxDOT, as they continue to develop out that corridor, then they can start looking at doing a project that gets it to an interstate standard. So that's the process and the step that we'll continue to look at. What does that look like how would that look like in San Angelo? So our game plan really, for us to be able to put an interstate placard on our highway, it has to be upgraded to interstate standard connected to an existing interstate. Does that make sense? So the closest interstate you have, and I always fascinated about San Angelo with this because my whole career with TxDOT in West Texas, if you drive I-20 and you drive I-10, we got a lot of good signage that says San Angelo. Right, San Angelo. There's San Angelo exit signs everywhere. Colorado City, Abilene, even back into the Eastland area, there's signs that get you to San Angelo. And I thought, man, San Angelo's done a pretty good job of getting their name, on a sign, on an interstate sign on 10 and 20 for a city that has no interstate, that runs through it. It's pretty impressive, actually. But what we'll do is we'll work at. I've already having conversations with districts. We'll work at getting Big Spring, for example, interstate standard on 87 south up to interstate standard, and it may not take as much because of where they're at already. We're going to work at Sonora, trying to work north on 277 to bring that corridor up to interstate standard so that we can actually start signing the interstate as we get those segments, those logical termini segments, completed. We can start signing Interstate 27, to San Angelo. So I can't start in San Angelo, even though we might get the relief route built first here. And that's okay, because you can get it built and you can do what with it? You can economically develop it. You know, you can get your relief route built and build it to interstate standard, and you can start economically developing it. It's kind of like when the Houston Heart was finished. What did that do for your city, you know, when you got it built? You can do the same thing here, just we can't put a 27 sign on it until I connect you to 10 or 20, you know, from either San Angelo or either from Big Spring or from Sonora. And we'll do that. We'll start working that, and that'll be our game plan to try to bring the interstate to you so we can get those signs in place. That make sense? Questions or thoughts on that?
Yes.
Nope, none? Okay.
Wanted to ask real
Go ahead,
quickly.
Lucy.
What years are we talking about the time limit?
ASAP.
Good question, Lucy. It's a good question because I'm going to be 60 years old next March, so I'm thinking, okay, how long am I going to do this? $26 million, I think it's going to take me 20 years to get the whole interstate built. 20 years is my number. I'd like to have big.
Built out to interstate
That's the whole thing.
standards. That does not mean improvements.
That's correct.
Along the way to get us there. So
That is
you will
correct.
see an improved corridor along the way that should open up the trade from Mexico coming north because you will have an improved corridor.
That is correct. And I've got a 10-year window in my head too, Commissioner, that Councilwoman, that is I like to see some things get, you know, and particularly I like to see some relief routes get built so that the cities can actually be developing them today instead of tomorrow, right? And then I will tell you, it looks like TxDOT's going to throw a lot of money at our corridor from Laredo to Eagle Pass to Del Rio. They're going to all the way
Sonora.
all the way up to Sonora. They're going to throw a lot of money at it.
And that's key.
And they've picked it up and I've kind of, I don't know if I've highlighted in this presentation. I'm going to Del Rio in a couple weeks, and I have highlighted in that one. They're going to put a lot of money on that portion of the corridor because I think we can actually sell it also as a dual purpose, not only interstate, but it also is going to help them with their border security issues. It's going to help them. I mean, it's going to help a lot. And when you have a full controlled access interstate that runs parallel to the border for 115 miles, you can do a lot of things with that. Your fencing, your controlled access, your fiber, your technology improvements and upgrades. You're going to be able to do a whole lot of stuff in that. So we think we'll get that built. I think in the next 5-6 years, I'll get a lot of that built.
And that's key
Yeah.
because that's the worst part of this entire corridor.
It-
It is the worst roads. It's the biggest problem. The conditions are terrible. The geography is terrible for doing this. So if we don't get it done first, the rest will be challenged. It's the key. It's the key.
And if you look at this picture, this is how in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of activity with our Ports and Plains group. We've actually been able to get congressionally designated future interstate. That's at the federal level. This year, big win is we were actually putting numbers on it. Now, we had little hiccups on what that numbering system needed to look like, but we've gotten through that, I think, because we have splits, right? It's kind of like the Dallas-Fort Worth. Those two cities, they want to be alone. They want to be them. We're Dallas. You're Fort Worth. Fort Worth. If you remember, Eamon Carter, he didn't really care for Dallas, never did, and so you have that history there. But so just like the 35 corridor, we have a 35 east and a 35 west. We'll have a 27 corridor. They'll have a 27 east and a 27 west. For you, it doesn't matter because it's 27. It's 27 through San Angelo, you know, when it gets to you here, and it'll be 27 north up to Dumas, where we split it again. We'll take the 27 designation over to Raton, and the reason why is because we just do not know for sure if Colorado DOT is going to play with us on a future interstate. I've got to spend some time in Colorado convincing the DOT officials of the value of having this interstate on the eastern range. Right now, that particular mindset is they don't want to build any additional lanes in Colorado. We want to go public transportation on Colorado Springs to Denver. It's just a whole mindset that we're going to have some conversations with. I would point out, there's an article just in the last 2 weeks about the value of having multiple interstates running through your system, especially like on I-95 in Pennsylvania when the deck went down and it got burned up. I just read an article this last week about the value of having to really, for freight movement, we're not going to see that much of a hindrance on our 95 corridor because they mentioned 2 other interstates that run pretty much parallel to the 95. So if I can get Denver to see that article and understand that, then there's value for us putting this interstate on the eastern range, you know, at least going up to Denver. And a lot of this traffic, quite frankly, you know, I'm selling TxDOT and Chairman Bug is, you know, he's a congestion man, rightly so. The governor has told him to, you know, fix the congestion in these big cities. But, you know, we can show him where we can take your truck traffic from Laredo out of San Antonio that wants to go west on 10, either to Denver or to California. There's a lot of it that does. We can take it this way. And
Commissioner New is very focused on safety because he heads up the safety committee.
he does.
On the Transportation Commission, or committee.
He really
Commission.
does.
Yeah.
Recent work Ports Plains has been able to do for you is what we call the old earmark program that was dead in 2009, 2010, has turned back on. There's new rules associated with it. There's a lot more restrictions associated with it, which is fine. It got it so that way it's not pork barrel. It's pretty good. It's called community project funding. Your Congressman Pfluger did submit. We submitted for a project that actually was a funded project. It was already funded. But here's the value of that. It's on it's on your highway out here north of town on 67 on 277 construction project, and it's about a 15, 16, 17 million dollar project that was already funded by TxDOT and I think your MPO. But we were able to get an additional $3 million out of Congressman Pfluger to put on that project, and why? That frees up $3 million in your MPO and TxDOT that they can actually redistribute in your area. So we are going to continue to ask our federal congressional delegations for that kind of money, because that's out of the federal highway bill. That's not coming back to TxDOT as a formula. They get their formula money. That $100 billion that I told you in UTP, about 35% of that is formula distributed by federal gas tax money back in. So that's about 35 billion of it is that federal gas tax money. But federal government is still holding billions and billions of dollars in their highway bill that's discretionary. That if we don't ask for it, we don't get it on our corridor, then it goes to the East Coast, it goes to California, it goes wherever the current administration wants to put it, in their programs. So we're going to continue to ask for that money to get it back to our communities in Texas where it needs to be. And this is just one request. We actually received we got quite a bit of it up and down the corridor, which is good. We're also asking for planning dollars. And this is something that to educate y'all on when Pfluger in the office, and Pfluger was pretty open to it. Arrington and Lubbock was pretty open to it. When you get down South Texas, some of those those senators and delegates, they like to put the money on the construction because they see it. You can see it. But we're trying to educate them, say, hey, listen, if you turn me loose on the planning, then when you guys call for your future federal dollar and you got that short window, you shovel ready. You may have heard the term shovel ready. If you hear that term, it's because the project has to be ready to be built. We can then give you some shovel ready projects because we've done all the planning. We've secured all the right of way. We've set aside the program. We've cleared the environmental. That's a 2 or 3 year process, just clearing environmental some of this. So that's a big deal. And we will continue to, like I said, work on upgrading the interstate from Sonora North and from Big Spring South to San Angelo, as I mentioned earlier. These are some TxDOT slides that Chris Cowan gave to the I-27 Advisory Committee. Shows some of the existing construction, as the mayor mentioned. We're not going to just not do anything on the corridor. There's future construction projects. There's safety and operational. Anything that's got an orange on that orange tab, that's under construction. But anything that's got a purple there on that slide, that's future plan. That's planning work. And you can see number 6 and number 7. We need to solve our relief route around San Angelo. What does that look like? And number 7 is the relief route around Sonora. What does that look like? We've got to do some planning work there. So anything that you see in the purple, that represents that's planning dollars that we're going after to try to build this program out. That's my presentation. Open for questions if you
I
have
have
any.
questions for Lauren. Yes, Tom.
So if you've traveled I-35, it's just brutal. I mean, I would do anything to avoid driving on I-35, even if I'm going to Corsicana from here. I mean, it's Gatesville, it's 514, it's a pretty drive. So how much of this, when you talk about the cost to benefit ratio is 2.4, how much of that are we robbing Peter to pay Paul? It's already there. Are we taking it off I-35 and I-35 will see that? Or is this organic growth we're going to see over here on the west side of it?
Well, it's a good question. And to answer that, it's additional growth. And here's the reason why. Because the TxDOT Commission will preach this at you too. They say Texas is growing by 1,000 people a day. 30,000 people a month are coming into this state. And So we,
Just so you know, we want that border to go all the way around the state.
we do. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. And so there's anticipated, first of all, if they don't fix the 35 situation, because we all know there people want to live, so many miles off of 35, right? Like 80, 70, let's see, what's the number? It's like about 90% of our population is like east of 35, right? 10% is west. But that model's changed a little bit. And it's going to change particularly for our southern segment, and then our Permian Basin segment. And it even shows the 2050 model that cities like San Angelo and Amarillo and Lubbock, so what I call our oases in the West, they're going to grow. They're going to be significant growth. And so I think so. The number itself was not robbing off an existing program per se. It's anticipated that our growth in our state's going to be that much that we need to accommodate it with this corridor.
Well, we talk about it in the following sense, and one is called national security. And so that's been an important part of the conversation as we've worked on this corridor, because we do provide the food, fuel, and fiber, not only for the nation, but internationally. And as more product is moved from China to Mexico, there's going to be more coming up from the south to the north. And it makes it even more important. We always talk about the following. You can invest $8 billion on I-35, and you still don't correct the congestion, because it just continues to get congested. The only way you can relieve congestion is to get a lot of the freight moving off of I-35 over to this new corridor. It's 600 miles between Interstate 35 and this new corridor. 600 miles. There's no transportation north and south. That's 600 miles. And so that becomes a really important part of it. And we also know that, in fact, as Drew Darby says, it's pretty hard. The accident rate, the death rate on I-35 is smaller because you're standing still. If you're around Midland, Odessa, and San Angelo, which are in the high priority corridors because of the energy industry, and your 2-lane highways, you got 18-wheelers coming at each other on 2-lane highways. So the death is a huge issue. Tremendous amount of accidents because of 2-lane highways. And Alvin is really focusing on that because that is his new responsibility on the commission. So for all those reasons, that is our strategy in terms of how we talk about it. Safety.
How do we prioritize the funding? I mean, we're all elected here to go San Angelo.
Right.
I've been in TML meetings and listened to Midland, Odessa, and them on this porch to plane, and they were certainly not favorable about it coming through Angelo. They wanted to spark it off and go west. Right. And avoid it. But so if you look at that priority of, like you said, that 32, 34 billion you had that was flexible, what prioritizes your opinion on where that money gets spent? Because I noticed on your segments you had them colored, north to south, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that high priority?
No, it's not. It's just number. It's just the nomenclature of numbering.
We were 4, and I was going up.
Yeah, no. They just started up there and they just numbered them that way.
In fact, the entire committee determined priority 1, 2, 3, and 4.
And so the I-27 Advisory Committee has a voice in that, how that priority happens. And currently TxDOT is going through listening sessions with the public on what would be some of the criteria to prioritize these projects. And we all were able to give some feedback into it. My recommendation, for example, will be, you look at short-term, mid-term, long-term. My thinking is let's go look at anything that needs a long lead time, like relief routes or whatever. Let's get some of that planning in the short term. Let's start that planning effort now. I would look at relief routes for economic development, but then I would also start taking a look at those segments of the interstate upgrade that go from, existing interstates to. And I think that will drive the priority a little bit.
Well, for example, you have Big Spring, which is already working on their reliever route on the east side of Big Spring. So they're using MPO monies from multiple, because they have Abilene, Big Spring, and some. All right, so they're combining those monies, and they're working on their reliever route on the east side. Lubbock has got the money to do their loop on the west side, which will connect north of Lubbock down to south of Lubbock we are working on our reliever route. So each of us in various areas are doing our part to start the process, not waiting for the main corridor, but doing the parts that will connect it ultimately. So there's work, when we say 10 years, there's work being done this year, next year, and the next year on these projects.
So there are certain projects that are going to drive driver behavior too. I'll give you an example. Amarillo up there on their loop. You know, we're working with Blair, the district engineer, to try to get direct connects off of existing 27 south between Canyon and Amarillo, get those direct connects on the loop so that that truck driver all of a sudden makes a decision. I'm not going to run my truck right through downtown Amarillo, which is a nightmare on 27, going in, you know, terminates there at their new ball field or whatever, you know. But once we get the direct connects built on the north and south side of that loop, all of a sudden the truck, it's feasible for that trucker to make that decision and choose that. It's happened in Big Spring too, as we've improved the signage for that, you know, on that relief route. And now all of a sudden truck traffic is starting to take that route instead of going through 87 through downtown, you know, Gregg Street. So that's those are going to be some of the priorities, I think, that will drive, you know, what gets built.
Well, and interestingly enough, until we started this 1079 study, many people in major positions in TxDOT didn't even realize that I-27 went through downtown Amarillo. When we took them up there and showed them that I-27 actually goes through the middle of Amarillo, they were like, how did that happen? So we weren't even a focus. We weren't even important enough for someone to look at that and say, how did that happen? So we've opened a tremendous amount of eyes and focus on this corridor that until 1079 was passed was not really a conversation, meaningful conversation.
And the model for us too, just so you understand, is when you start looking at freight movement by dollar volume, sometimes we don't see the largest dollar volume on our corridor because we're not moving automobile parts or technology. You know, that's going California way. You'll see that, or it's going up to Illinois, right? You'll see that on those corridors. However, when you start looking at truck volume by commodities, all of a sudden we become a serious contender in terms of the way we're going to feed the world. The food, fiber, and fuel discussion, we understand the fuel discussion. We understand where that's coming from. But the fiber, you know, 40% of the nation's cotton is in the Panhandle, 40% of the nation's cotton. Today, it goes by truck to Fort Worth rail yards. It gets on a rail, and it comes right back through Lubbock on the way to Long Beach, California, to get on a ship to get to China. So
you have to go north to go south.
So as Mexico continues to build their corridor, and they're improving their corridor from Eagle Pass, Laredo, on the Mazatlan to Mazatlan. As they continue to do those improvements, all of a sudden our Cotton Growers Association says, you know what, it's cheaper for us, more beneficial for us, even while we're still dealing with China, to run it down our corridor south, and go into Mazatlan's port and go out that way. And then in the future, as I mentioned nearshoring in the beginning of my presentation, who knows, maybe the future, you know, jeans and shirts are not being made in China, they're being made in Mexico or Central America, and they're going down that way anyway, right?
Same thing with the cattle industry. What part does...
12 of the nation's top 20 feedlots, 12 of the nation's top 20 feedlots are on our corridor. You know, I mean, that gets us into the Heartland Expressway and up that way too, but it's on our corridor. In 2022, 3 of the top 6 agricultural exports in our nation was cotton, dairy, and cattle. 3 of the top 6. We're getting a bulk of the nation's dairy, and I've already told you the numbers on the cotton, and we've got the bulk of the nation's cattle sitting on our corridor. And I tell people, you can't pipeline that cow. You can pipeline that oil and gas product, but you just can't pipeline that cow. So.
And the other part of this study, which is amazing, is that statistically, those numbers had not been brought forward and put out there before. So by forcing this consultant group to be hired, they spent amazing how quickly, how much work they put into this thing, proved up and produced these statistics that really no one had talked about ever.
And just a side note, you know, just some things that I'm interested in too is you have bases at Del Rio, San Angelo, Abilene, Wichita Falls on the 277 corridor. I think at some point, down the road, I'm going to have some conversation with your Department of Defense about the history of our western forts, one, two, our existing bases, two, for for today, because I think there could be some potential for us to be tapping into a funding pot at the federal level that's not just transportation, but it could be our defense budget in terms of what we do with this corridor. Especially
Again, the national security issue
and that
attached
too,
to that.
that too, yeah.
And we remind everybody that Eisenhower, when he created the interstate east and west, they didn't base the location of that on population. They base it off of the most direct, easiest route to go east to west. And so when we're challenged about the population of, for example, our corridor versus the I-35 corridor, we remind everyone that Eisenhower didn't base it off of population, but the ease of transportation, the fastest route, quickest route.
There was a military in that act too.
That's right.
That word
That
was in
was
the
key.
act too. So
Yeah.
so we'll tap into that.
I have one final question
Yeah.
on this one, and maybe this is the question I get, as we sit here and look. We just want to know where it's going to be in San Angelo and Tom Green County. I mean, there's a ton of people that would be prepared to do development, and at this point, they're like, we think we know how it's going to go San Angelo, but nobody knows. I mean, when you can define that, then there's going to be a lot of money played and a lot of investment here. So is it hard for the plan to say the route's going to cut off at Grape Creek or where it's going to go right around here? There's a lot of people prepared to make economic investment.
Yeah, it's the reason we're asking for planning money, because we can't designate that till we've been given the planning money to officially figure that out.
Your current study, Chris Cowan and the district, with the MPO, y'all have got a study going on about potential relief route around, on the west, on the east side, coming around to the north, right? And that part, some of that study's funded, but we, I think we will continue to ask Austin to give Chris even more money to look at what it would be like to bring that up to future interstate standards. Bring it, and if that becomes the route that everybody's happy in San Angelo with having, then we can identify that now today and get that planning identified, and that way then your developers can say, okay, now we know where it's coming. We can do something with it. It's a good question.
And
it
we
needs
are
to be-
pushing at the MPO level.
And it does need to happen there.
Well, I mean, that's the most common question.
Sure.
I don't know about all y'all up here, but everybody's like, where's that route going to go?
Yeah.
But we don't know.
And we do know, our route is going to go 277 south. So we know we have to figure out this thing around San Angelo to get back to 277 south, right? Because we know it's going that way on our corridor. Granted, TxDOT they have these key strategic highway corridors. They've got 4 or 5 of them across the state, and what that is that's their way of spending some of that Cat 4 money back. When I told you back in 2004 when the trunk system money dried up, now they've identified 5 or 6 of these corridors in 2016, 2017 to start spending again. We've got most of our route on one of those key corridors, but their money that they're spending is just to get it to a 4-lane divided highway. So it's our job then to work with the districts to say, listen, do your planning work for future interstate upgrade, which includes controlled access issues, includes the right-of-way path, the width. It'll include, whatever grade separations. Do your planning studies for that, even though we know TxDOT's going to give you maybe some money just to build it to a 4-lane divided standard, that intermittent build, so to speak. And then for us in San Angelo right now, that corridor doesn't go south of San Angelo on 277. That little segment's not picked up. So we're going to have to do some extra work there to find the money for it. Currently, that segment goes over to Eden and ties in down at Junction, right? That's where their priority is on that. And you see some work going on there because of that. So,
Well, that's the 83 thing.
correct.
That takes you on down to
Yeah.
I-10 to Corpus Christi.
But fortunately for us, San Angelo North, it picks up on our corridor. But what does that mean? It means that Abilene has a little bit of segment south of Big Spring that needs to be 4-lane divided. They're currently planning and doing that. Now, granted, the district is working at doing some planning work to see if we can get it to a future interstate standard too, which is what we're asking them to do. Lubbock, you get up north of Lubbock, all their stuff's already 4-lane divided. So Steve doesn't have any, he's not going to get any extra money to do that. The Midland Odessa people were upset because that 158 didn't get picked up on that key corridor. Well, the reason why is if you drive 158 to Midland and you drive 349 north of Midland to Lamesa, it's already 4-lane. Not divided, some of it, but it's 4-lane. So it won't qualify for that key strategic funding that the TxDOT is currently spending because they're trying to upgrade to 4-lane divided standard. So we're going after other money, though, planning particularly, to get us into that segment.
Ma'am,
Yes, Tom, tell me. You'll be next.
thank you, ma'am.
I want to have another conversation. We don't have time today.
Okay.
But do you have cards you can give us?
I do. Yeah, actually, I actually thought I said, man, they're not gonna want my card, but anyway, it is, yeah.
You this card.
I do. I'll get some.
Okay.
Tommy, I'll get some. to you
Okay.
with it, yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Lauren.
Hey, be glad to, if you follow up, if you have any questions, folks, give me a call. I'm glad to talk to you about it.
Larry?
Since the route hasn't been identified how it's going to impact St. Angelo, we have one major project, and we're thinking it's going to be just incredible, and that's the rail port. I'd like to know thoughts on the integration of the rail port to the proposed I-27.
I think that's important. I think we need to figure out a way to create access from a future interstate into your rail port. That same conversation is happening in Laredo this week. Eagle Pass this week. I've got to speak at a summit in a couple days, and there's a Puerto Verde where they're doing a summit. I mean, they're doing actually a similar thing. We're using rail to move product across the border from the south side to the north side. And part of our conversation needs to be, how does our future 27 need to tie into that rail yard, right? That's an important question. I think y'all need to spend time planning that and thinking about how you can take advantage of how your interstate can connect to your rail port.
We brought up the rail port 2 weeks ago when I was down there for the Transportation Commission meeting. The importance of because many of the people on the commission are not aware, certainly Alvin is, about the rail, and their TxDOT is over, or Alvin on transportation is over rail as well.
And TxDOT has a division, freight and multimodal, and Caroline Mays oversees one of those. That's one of the divisions she oversees, which Caroline used to work for me, by the way. So I do know, that she has been. They've been emphasized that we cannot forget about aviation and rail and waterway. TxDOT owns a waterway. They manage a waterway too. People don't realize that, but the Gulf Intercoastal is under TxDOT's responsibility to manage too. So.
And Carolyn knows that any time she needs us to come to Austin to speak towards the issues and the needs, to call. So we've worked really closely with her, and she has a passion for San Angelo.
I think your rail thing's great. I'm kind of passionate about that too. I was a district engineer in Odessa for 10 years, and that rail ran through my district at the time, and I was trying to figure out how can we spend money to get, improve this rail, because it's got potential. I guess you can thank Rob Janelle for that, I guess. So.
Any further questions or comments? Lauren will have business cards.